to see things from the camera eye point of view is a position of privilege because it exposes, as Benjamin tells us again and again, things about reality that we wouldn't otherwise notice. The camera is capable of slow motion. It's capable of angles of incidence that we couldn't otherwise see. It's capable of all kinds of effects. Let me enumerate them. I think it's on page 1235. Photographic reproduction, top of the left-hand column. Photographic reproduction with the aid of certain processes such as enlargement or slow motion can capture images which escape natural vision. And on page 1245, he gives this process a name. He says, the camera introduces us to unconscious optics, just as does psychoanalysis to unconscious impulses. In other words, the camera's eye point of view is a privileged perspective. It does show us things as they are, or perhaps if not as they are, at least it reminds us that things as we see them with the naked eye aren't necessarily as they are. I mean, it's not perhaps so much a notion of privileging what the camera sees as real over against what I see. It's a question of the camera reminding us, demystifying our ideology, in short, reminding us that things as we see them aren't necessarily the way things are. The camera, too, may have its bias. Slow motion is an obvious bias. Speed up is an obvious bias. But the speed at which we see things may be a bias too. That's the point of the exposure. I mean, it's not that the psychoanalytic unconscious is telling the truth. I mean, dreams are crazy, right? That's the whole point of dreams. It's not that it's reality over against a mystified world seen in consciousness. It's a challenge to consciousness by the world evoked in the unconscious. Not a question of what's real and what isn't real. Well, it's the same with the camera's eye point of view. And it's all of this which awakens, in a certain sense, awakens the spectator from the complacency of supposing his or her own perspective to be the truth. At the same time, admittedly, the spectator is distracted, zerstreut. Well, what then? The point is this. There's a kind of dialectic between distraction and shock, which is crucial, Benjamin thinks, to a genuine aesthetic revelation. Perhaps the best analogy is with Saul on the road to Damascus. You know how the story goes. Saul's trotting along on his horse and not paying a lot of attention. He's distracted, daydreaming, whatever, and whoop, all of a sudden he falls off his horse. Right? That's a shock. And it's such a shock that he's converted to Christianity, and he stands up and he brushes himself off, and his name is Paul. Right? He's a completely different person, as a result. And this couldn't have happened, in other words, if he hadn't been distracted. Right? That's Benjamin's point. Distraction is the atmosphere or medium in which the shock of revelation can take place. And that's the advantage of distraction. He gives a wonderful example of the way in which we do receive works of art in distraction, even if we're the kind of person who does pay a lot of attention when they go to the movies, and that's not me, we say. Nevertheless, there is one way in which all of us receive works of art in a state of distraction, and that's in our reception of architecture. We pass through architecture. I work in the British Art Centre every day. I have long since ceased to pay any attention to the British Art Centre as a building. I receive the British Art Centre, in other words, in a state of distraction. But that doesn't mean that it's not part of my aesthetic experience. It does, however, show that the aesthetic and the ways in which we process the forms of the world can be assimilated in more than one kind of state of attention. It is in one's bones, in a certain sense, to receive architecture. And yet, at the same time, unless we are sort of tourists gaping in front of the Taj Mahal with a camera or something like that, and Benjamin does take that into account. Unless we are in that particular mode, we receive the forms of our dwellings in a state of what you might call constructive distraction. All of that goes into Benjamin's aesthetic of participation. Now, I am out of time. Perhaps I've said just about as much about Adorno as I need to say, although admittedly I haven't said much about the culture industry essay. Maybe I'll come back to that briefly before launching into Jameson on Thursday. On Tuesday of next week, we'll be talking about the new historicism, and then we'll bring Tony back, and we'll go through all these various perspectives that we will have been rehearsing to see what we can do with them when we read Tony.